Welcome again to the FHBRT. I'm Dan and I'm back with Justin Jett. The trade season is upon us. There are teams with plenty of work to do and plenty that have already started. Let's get going with the Pistons. Detroit traded for Blake Griffin. They finally have a big to pair with Andre Drummond. Their point guard position is a big question mark as they wait for Reggie Jackson to get back, but this team certainly looks different. What's your take on this new Detroit squad?
So, for this season, I don't love the Pistons roster construction. At face value, they have a lot of lower guys having to step up, which means less depth. I do like what it means for Luke Kennard. He's shown a lot this season in terms of his defense, in terms of his shooting. He's not great at dribbling the basketball, but he has had more ball handling ability than I thought he would. He's shooting 43% from three this season, which is ridiculous. So he's going to be able to move up to the starting lineup. And obviously the big deal is the big three, heavy quotation marks there for Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, and Reggie Jackson, who are going to be tied up $75 million in the cap the next 2 seasons at least. And so it's very strange that the Pistons locked in basically a worse version of Lob City with maybe even less depth, especially moving their first round pick. They're not going to have a young guy to bring up this next season. So they're going to have to do some work in order for this to make sense in the years to come. I really don't like what it looks like for the Pistons roster, but Blake Griffin is really good. He's actually having a extremely similar season to the one where Chris Paul went down and he was getting a bunch of MVP hype. If you look at the numbers, they're pretty similar. He's shooting less effectively, but they are really, really similar in terms of the basic counting stats. He's a lot more skilled than he was when he was a high flyer, and I think people forget that. How Drummond's been playing this season. Maybe they'll be able to do some things at the beginning or at the end of this year, but I don't see them really gaining traction until next year.
I think this was the best move they could have made for themselves in both the short and long run. They didn't just double down on this season, they did so in the future. They have Blake Griffin for a while, which I think is huge actually, because they weren't going to land an all-star in free agency anyway. And if we can call Blake an all-star, he hasn't played a full season in a while. With this trade, though, they've positioned themselves well for the playoffs, but there's still room for improvement on the roster. I guess the question is there any room for improvement this season? Are there still moves to be made in Detroit?
I don't know what assets they have to move. They could attempt to move Ish Smith, but every team has a point guard. They could attempt to move maybe Henry Ellenson, but nobody needs a big man who can shoot but can't get on the court. They could attempt to move Reggie Bullock, but he's not enticing anybody. And they just moved their first round pick. And so I think this season they're pretty much stuck with the lineup that they have. They might be able to make some minor moves that won't really move the needle, but it's not until next season when they get some more contracts off the books that they'll be able to shift things around and probably get the roster that they're hoping for.
The team on the other side of this trade table was the Clippers. I think the Clippers are now in a pseudo fire sale mode. I can't see why they wouldn't make everyone else on the roster available for picks. If you're LA, you obviously want to keep your youth like Harrell and such, but DeAndre and Lou both have a price, and Gallo would have one too if he hadn't been injured for a minute. The ideal plan would be to head into the offseason with as many draft picks as you can without compromising your youth. It's been reported that Cleveland doesn't want to give up their Nets pick, but everything changes when the deadline starts approaching, and at that, I'm sure there are other suitors out there for DeAndre. Who do you see picking at the meat of this Clippers team?
So I think the obvious player moved is DeAndre Jordan. He doesn't make sense now with what they're attempting to do in his 9th year, and I think teams will be clamoring for him, especially the Cavaliers, who need a big man presence down low and have basically no rim protection. DeAndre Jordan will give you that tenfold. And of course he has his limitations, but I think there'll be teams calling, and I think the Clippers may be able to get another first round pick for him, which would be incredible as they now have 2 next season. And if they were to move him, I still like Montrezl Harrell. He's high energy. He's been improving a lot in the post, and I don't hate this Clippers roster. In fact, I like this Clippers roster more than I like the Pistons roster right now. Even if the Clippers move DeAndre Jordan for minor role players and a pick, I would still like this Clippers roster more. Avery Bradley, I believe, still can do things. I spoke about this on Twitter, but the Pistons were running him through an incredible amount of dribble handoffs, which he has never been good at. He was high in the league last year in them, but he was not effective, and he's more than doubled his amount of dribble handoffs this season with the Pistons, and he's not shooting good percentage, which is dragging all his shooting numbers down. He is still well known for his defense. I think he'll be much better on the Clippers or any other team he has then moved on to. Sam Decker can do things. Tobias Harris has become a lethal shooter. And this team, up top to bottom, is just filled with high energy, shifty wings and guards. And that's where the league is going. And so they may not be looking for a championship this season or in the next few seasons, but they're going to be a fun team, I think. And they're going to be a team that hangs around while still accumulating assets because of the sheer quantity of guys that they have and can move for picks or future players.
Yeah, I can see where players like Juwan Heavens and Sam Decker are more untouchable than anything else on this Clippers roster. Hanging on to that youth is important for this team. Honestly, like what they're doing. I'm assuming this trade stemmed from realization that Blake Griffin just isn't going to cut it and they aren't going to come to terms with the DeAndre Jordan deal in the offseason. Even with Blake, getting a first for DeAndre was probably too much to pass up on, and at that point, you might as well just shop Blake. I'm saying this all assuming DJ will get eventually traded, but I like their situation a lot more than I did before the trade. Hopefully some good things come out of this for the Clippers though. I don't think that this rebuilding era for them is going to last too long.
I think that the big thing is everyone was expecting the Clippers to tank after this move, and they pretty publicly said this is not what that is. They're trying to go the Boston Celtics route, the Houston Rockets route of still being in playoff contention, but accumulating the right assets to hopefully get the star players that'll eject them into contention someday. And I think the roster and now the picks that they're getting get them in that space. Don't count the Clippers out for the playoffs at all. They're not a lock for the lottery yet.
Moving on to Washington, John Wall is out for a while, meaning they have some issues to address. If you're the Washington Wizards, who are you targeting before the deadline?
So, with John Wall out a couple months, he is supposed to come back right before the playoffs. And the player that I have really been wanting to move is Tyreke Evans. He is playing phenomenal basketball this season. He is a ball handler. He can take over some of the responsibilities that John Wall had in Washington. And then when Wall comes back, he's a great player that could come off the bench or get moved into the starting lineup even. He has the length to maybe move to small forward. And they have their own 2018 first-round pick this season. Last year, they traded a first-rounder for Bogdanovic. And Tyreke Evans is a much better player. Makes much more sense with the circumstances that the Wizards are in. And the Wizards are no lock for the playoffs. I think the Pistons' move for Blake Griffin and getting rid of some of their depth hurts their chances of making the playoffs, and they're 4.5 games back of the Wizards, which is a sizable amount. There's still a lot of games to be played. But I think if the Wizards were to trade Tyreke Evans for that first-round pick, if that's enough, that could really keep them in the conversation until John Wall gets back. And then I think they're a really, really interesting team if they're able to complete that.
So this 2018 pick is a real point of contention. John Wall's going to be out, yes, but I think it's fair to expect that Oubre, Porter, and Beal will carry you to the playoffs just fine. And yeah, it would be nice to retool with their 2018 first-round pick, but I don't know if they're going to be willing to part with it given the climate around their team. And maybe to get around that, they're going to need to consider other avenues to rejuvenate their roster, if that's what they really want. I just don't feel as confident as everyone else that this pick of theirs is going to be moved.
I agree with you in that maybe they learned something from last year that trading your first-rounder for a player that may or may not help you isn't great in the long run, but they also had a very exciting playoff run last season. And I think that is downgraded among the NBA cognoscenti, that exciting playoff runs mean a lot to franchises, to their fans, and to just everyone in the organization. And they had all of this controversy last season as well. They have always been a very weird team. And so maybe it is just a rental for Tyreke Evans. Maybe they decide they're going to pass on that, but I think that's going to be a mistake in that this season in the East, it seems more open than it's been in a decade. And the Wizards have the talent and could get the talent to really make a run and make another exciting playoff run for a team that in its history doesn't have a ton of those.
All right, Jet. Anything else you want to add? You have a storyline for the week?
I just wanted to end it with this Nikolai Mirotic to the Pelicans trade idea that fell through because Mirotic needs or wants that guarantee for next season where he gets $12 million. I think If the Pelicans were to execute it, it would be just extremely good for them. It is a nice fit at the 4. When DeMarcus Cousins was not in the lineup, the Pelicans often played a stretch 4. Mirotic would be phenomenal in that role. It's a lot of money for him, but if it means getting Asik off the books, that is really important down the road. And the Pelicans have players that are still going to be under the salary. Darius Miller has been great for them. Tony Allen may have to get moved in order to get Mirotic, but he's been injured for a while and hasn't been part of their most recent run. Drew Holiday's been playing great, and I think a starting lineup that includes, a team that includes Nikola Mirotic makes a lot of sense not only for this season to keep them in the playoffs and keep a player who pretty much everyone is rumoring is going to get moved to stay in a small market city for this year and the years to come. And Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, if they choose to stay in New Orleans, could be something special, and this could be just a piece that causes that to become true.
If this trade goes through, give me an idea of how excited Anthony Davis will be to play center to finish the season and into the playoffs.
So he doesn't like playing center at all. So that is a good point in that it isn't getting another big man, but it's a lot of the same thing that happened with Carmelo Anthony when he didn't want to get moved to power forward. No matter how much a player desires to not go down a position, that's the evolution of the league right now. And you can't, on one hand, get upset that your team is not winning and your organization is not putting you in a good spot to win, and also handcuffing them by making them sign a huge center so you don't have to get those center minutes. And so it's a catch-22. Either you do the thing you don't want to do, or you do it and you succeed. You have a better chance to succeed. So I think that's what would happen if Mirotic was signed.
Thank you for supporting on Twitter if you did. Thank you for watching here on YouTube. Go ahead and give Justin Jett a follow. He works really hard and is putting out good content. While you're there, maybe give me a follow too. I don't work as hard, but it'll make me happy. Thanks.